Well, let's do something a little different. Hey, look who's here. Kel, how are you?
Great. How about you?
Good to see you. Fantastic.
See you.
Seeing you, it's great. I only see you on the internet these days. Traveling the world. Yeah. If you ever need a chaperone, I'm available. Madhuri would be more than happy to get rid of me. So, let's do something a little bit different. How about, rather than, we'll get into telling some stories some later, but why don't we do something different? How about if some of you just grab one word, and don't use the usual ones, like such as hungry, freezing, ice cold, just a word. So if somebody raise their hand and give me a word. Joy. Okay, so the first time that I ever walked into the temple here in New Vrindaban, I had come from New York, where I had actually no inclination, to live in a city temple, because when I got to the temple, I was from the streets of Brooklyn, and I was a walking disaster, and the devotees all looked so saintly and wonderful, and the thought that I could ever possibly associate with these angelic beings was, kind of out of the question. But I thought, oh, maybe I could go live on a farm. But all the devotees in New York said, no, you bring so many devotees to the temple, and you preach nicely, you were born in New York, that's where Krishna wants you. So you should just stay in New York. And I thought, actually that makes sense, the whole thing, surrender, the devotees are saying this, it seems logical, it seems like what Krishna would want. So I should do that, I should just move in. By the way, they also said, don't ever go to New Vrindaban. Ixnay on New Vrindaban. That place is bad news, you'll freeze, you'll starve, they're in Maya, don't go there. So I thought, okay, this makes perfect sense. So I signed up. The temple was actually far more together at that time than you might imagine. You had to sign an application, you had to wait for like a week for them to review it, you had to give them a day that you were going to move in, and then you would move into the temple. So I did all that. I signed the application, I sold everything I had, I moved in with my parents for a week before I was getting ready to go. And in New York, especially where I came from in Brooklyn, nobody had a car. None of my friends had a car, not one person had a car. And I was 19 at this time, and 20. And all of a sudden, I'm about to move into the temple on Thursday. And one of my friends comes along, and this is the only guy that I knew who had a car. And he said to me, hey, this weekend, I'm going to New Vrindaban. This guy had never even been to the Brooklyn temple. He said, I'm going to New Vrindaban this weekend. Why don't you come? And I said, well, I can't, because I'm already signed up to move into the temple on Thursday. And he said, well, that's crazy. You've been talking about going to New Vrindaban, living on a farm, all this. You should at least go and see it. So I thought, well, that kind of makes sense. So I did. I jumped in the car, not that moment, but the next day or whatever, and we came to New Vrindaban. And when I got here, there was a devotee who was kind of one of the big wigs in New York at the time. He now lives in Alachua. He did a lot of preaching in Russia. His name is Kirtiraj. Many of you probably know Kirtiraj. And Kirtiraj was one of the big wigs at Henry Street. And he was here in New Vrindaban. There was a festival going on. It was dead of winter. It was December of 1973. Dead of winter. The whole place was frozen. But Kirtiraj was here because he was contemplating coming to live in New Vrindaban. So I went into the temple that morning for the morning program, and when I came out of the temple room, remember there was that little tunnel, the deities were here, where you looked at Radha Vrindavan Chandra and the Vrindaban, and then right to their left there was like a little tunnel, because it was an extension. They had added Shamakunda, passed away not long ago on today or yesterday or that date, his anniversary, but he had built an extension, and that was the temple room. So there was this little tunnel that you went from the temple to the prasada room. And Nanda Maharaj was in there, Kirtiraj was in there, all the devotees were in there. And Kirti Raj and Kirtananda Maharaj walked out of the temple. And then I went through that tunnel. And as I stepped out of the tunnel, Kirtananda Swami and Kirti Raj were standing 6 feet, social distancing, even then. So I can tell Madhuri we were all social distancing, even Kirtananda Maharaj and Kirti Raj. And Kirti Raj looked at me and he said, "What are you doing here?" Because he knew I was supposed to move into New York that week. And this is where the joy comes in. Kirtananda Swami turned around to me and he said, first thing he ever said to me, he said, "I think this boy has been captured by the beauty of Shri Shri Radha Vrindavan." So that's what I have to say for joy. That was a fact. When I got out of the car the night before, it was probably around this time, it was dark, the whole place was frozen, everything was covered in ice. When we pulled into Bahulaban and got up on the hill, there was that driveway that used to kind of come up there and go up to Kirtananda Maharaj's cabin and swing off. And I was standing on that hill and I was looking up, and the whole place was like, it was an ice storm. Everything was covered in ice and it just looked like diamonds everywhere. And there was just a couple of light bulbs, one on the temple, one on the barn, one on his cabin, and that was it. Just like 3 light bulbs glittering off all this beautiful ice and the smell of smoke. And I knew right then that I would never leave New Vrindavan. So this is where I'm supposed to be. So that was the first joy I ever had in New Vrindavan. And it's been extended. So let's get another word. Somebody got a word? Any word. It doesn't have to be.
Kindness.
Kindness. Wow. So, yeah, kindness, next to the most important people in my lives have been the 2 women I was married to, because they certainly saved my life. And of course Prabhupada, everybody expects that, but I have to say that without my wives, I would never even have stayed in Krishna consciousness, so they were actually more important. But even more important than Prabhupada for me was Kirtananda Maharaj. Because when I came, it was like, all the devotees here were so, he was like the father figure. He was getting everything done. He was getting so much done. He was inspiring everyone to live through unbelievable hardships. And when I came, I wasn't going to start at the beginning with stories, but in terms of kindness, when I was at that festival the week before, a couple of weeks before, I went to Kirtananda Maharaj and I said, I think I'd like to come live here. Myself, my girlfriend, and my brother, we'd like to come live here. And he said, sure. And I said, is there some place for us to live? And he said, yeah. And I said, great. So I went back to New York, sold everything we had. I called him, and oh, by the way, on the way back to New York, I became sicker than I'd ever been in my life. New Vrindavan belly. It was like Delhi belly, but worse. New Vrindavan belly from drinking water with little worms in it. So everybody who would come to New Vrindavan would get deathly ill. So I went back to New York ready to come back, and I was deathly ill for like 2 weeks, like complete addict. But I called Kirtananda Maharaj and I said, okay, I'm getting ready to come back. Is there anything you need? And he gave me a list, and I proceeded to spend my life savings. It was about $4,000, somewhere between $4,000 and $8,000. I filled up a trailer, to bring down here. And when I arrived down in the parking lot, the brahmachari swooped down and just started emptying it, carrying everything away. And so I was there, and I was like, okay, great, here I am. But, they seem to like me. Hey, great! Carrying bags. So then I go up to Bhaktipad's cabin, and I go, Hare Krishna Maharaj, here, where should I live? And he said, oh, Kuladri was away at the time. He was the temple president, but he was in LA learning how to paint. And there was a devotee named Radhakanta who was in charge. So he said, go down to the temple. It was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon or something. He said, go down to the temple and find Radhakanta. He's the acting temple president, and he'll let you know where your apartment is. I was like, great. So I went down, and Radhakanta was sitting in the old prasadam room. Remember, there was the, you know, you walked through the Tulsi greenhouse, and then you walked in the side door, and there was a mantle down the, as you went in the side door, down that end, and on the mantle they would have there was a mirror, and the tilak was up there, so before you went to the temple, you'd always put on the tilak. And sitting right across from that mantle was Radhakanta and another devotee named Devakinandana. And they were sitting there, covered in mud, but it was frozen, so it was, you know. So they were sitting there, and Radhakanta was playing the harmonium, chanted very nicely, and I just stood there, you know, maybe 10, 12 feet away from where they were. And then they finished, and I said, excuse me, are one of you Radhakanta? And this devotee said, big smiling face, with a huge southern drawl, said, I'm Radhakanta. And I said, no. I said, Kirtananda Maharaj told me to come down here and find you and ask you. And so they're both sitting on the floor. Radhakanta's here, Devakinanda is here, and I'm over there. And he said, I say, Radhakanta, he told me I should come down here and find you and ask you where I should live. To which Radhakanta responded like this. And then he went like this. And then he turned around to me again like this. And then he did this again. And then he turned around to me again and he said, he told you to ask me where you should live? And I said, yes, Prabhu. And he quoted very succinctly, he said, I think it's somewhere in the Bhagavatam, he said, son of a bitch! Son of a bitch! He told you to ask me where you should live. And I said, yes, Prabhu. And he said, son of a bitch! He knows there's no place for you to live. So I'm thinking, oh, my brother, my girlfriend, you know, this is not good. So I proceed back up to, kindness is the word. So I go back up to his cabin. And I said, excuse me, Maharaj, about Radhakanta. Radhakanta says, there is no place for me to live. And he says, oh, okay. He says, well, tell you what, down below the temple, in the parking lot, it wasn't a parking lot at the time, later on it became a parking lot. Down right below the temple, there was a staircase that went by Bahulaban, down past the kitchen, and right at the bottom of that staircase, there was an old green truck parked, no wheels. It was like an ice cream truck, one of those square, it wasn't a truck with a back, it was just a square truck with walls, just tin walls. So he said, what you can do is you can go down and you can live in that truck until we get you an apartment. So I thought, oh, okay, you know. So we went down there and moved our stuff into this empty truck. And we had brought a lot of stuff with us because we had been here a couple of weeks before and it was freezing. So we brought all kinds of blankets, sweaters, clothes. And that night we proceeded to sleep with everything we owned on top of us, next to each other. I don't think we were breaking the principles, but we were hugging them. And we had everything on top of us. And still we almost froze to death. It was like ridiculously cold. Didn't sleep all night. So the next morning I go back up to Maharaj and I say, excuse me, Maharaj, about sleeping in the trunk. I said, you know, there's no heat, and if we sleep in that truck again tonight, we may die. You know, I don't know that we can even make it through the night. So he said, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll get you a heater. So they came up with this little thing like this, like a Coleman lantern looking thing, but it was a heater. So he gave us this heater, and we lit it, you know, and I'm not very handy with those kind of things, being from Brooklyn, you know. I've never even mowed a lawn at that time, you know. So we get this thing, and we had a light, but we get it going. And we go to sleep again with all this stuff in the lamp, and it's actually kind of romantic, you know. Warm glow in the truck, just turn on, you know, country living. Wow, this is kind of nice, you know. Yeah.
Where did your friend go, the other guy?
My brother, he had to go up to the Brahmachari ashram. I'll get back to that.
Which brother?
Billy. Yes, which of my many brothers. We spend that night, and it's actually kind of nice. But as a result of being warm and not sleeping the night before, I sleep late, and it's time for Mangalarti, and I jump up and run up that one flight of steps, and at that time the men's bathhouse is the boiler room under the old temple. And when you open the door, which is just planks that are nailed together, it's not a real door, when you drag it open, like across the mud and rocks, then inside is this big old furnace with big chunks of wood. It's a very small room, and over here there are a couple of pallets on the floor with barrels, red pickle barrels, with ice water in it, and you have to bathe. But I'm running late for Mangalarti, and as I go in, there's a devotee coming out, and he just moved here a little while before I had gotten here, and his name was Dharmatma. So Dharmatma's coming out, I'm going in, he kind of looks at me, and you know, I go in, I'm rushing, get in there, bathe, you know, get all ready to go running up, go into the temple room, go into the prasadam room, run down to the mantle, dip my finger in the tilak, and look up, and my entire face is black. The lamp has been giving off these noxious fumes. There's poisonous fumes cascading through the air. I thought I was feeling a little lighthearted that morning. So I look in the mirror and I'm black. I mean, I look like Al Jolson, literally. When I blink my eyes, it's like white spots, you know? And I'm like, oh my God. So I run, I have a chada, and I put it down over my head because I got to go in the temple. I don't want anyone to see me. So I put the chada down like this, and I'm like, Haribo, I hope nobody sees me. So after that, I escape, go down, try to get the stuff. The stuff won't come off with cold water, you know, it's like oily. So I have to go back up to Kirtan Maharaj's cabin and say, Maharaj, about the heater, that's probably not going to work out either. One more day and I'll be dead from the heat. So he says, okay, here's what we'll do. Right below his cabin is the only source of income in the entire community. It's the Incense Warehouse. We have no Sankirtan at that time. There's nobody coming here. We have absolutely no source of income. But there's this little building. You can see pictures of it in that book. If it comes around, I'll point it out to you. There's this little cinder block building. It's maybe 12 to 14 feet wide and about 15 feet long. And when you open the door, there was an aisle down the middle and shelves, wooden shelves stacked with incense and oils and everything else. And you walk down this narrow aisle, and there was a wood heater, and then shelves again. And on the wall across from the wood heater, halfway down the room, was a bulletin board and a desk. So the person who worked in there during the day sat at that desk. So he said, so what you can do is you and your wife can leave everything in the truck, but at night you can sleep on the floor in the Incense Warehouse, which is an aisle. So, okay, fantastic. So the first night we're in there, I had already read one missive in the community, which was in the prasadam room. There was a bulletin board right outside the entrance to the pujari room. Not the entrance in the middle of the room, but the one that was in the corner there that would go into what was the kitchen, later became the pujari room. And there was a bulletin board right there. And on that bulletin board there was a note. There were two things of note. There was the note I'm going to describe right now, and there was also a famous letter. It's a letter from Prabhupada to Kirtananda Maharaj, where Kirtananda Maharaj had written him years before and said, you know, everyone's left, I'm the only one here, I think I should go and preach and make devotees, and then I can make men and money and bring them back. And Prabhupada wrote him back and told him, no, you should stay, worship Radha and Krishna, and they will bring all men and money. That letter was on the bulletin board. Right next to that letter, there was another little note, and that note said, anyone caught passing stool or urine anywhere other than the outhouse will immediately be asked to leave the community. So I'm like, well, that's interesting. So I, you know, scurry back to the Incense Warehouse. I tell my wife about that note, and she says, oh, look at this one. And she brings me to the bulletin board in the Incense Warehouse. And that's not a note, it's a newspaper article describing how just a couple of months before, a few months before, a band of bikers had attacked the community and shot a few of the devotees. So now I'm thinking, well, either I'm going to freeze to death, step in stool somewhere, or get killed by these bikers. It's like third night in the community, but we're talking about kindness. So what happens is, I spend the next week or two doing that. Our stuff is in the truck, but we're sleeping on the floor in the Incense Warehouse. Now, the wood stoves in those days were not, Shalabhati probably remembers, they were just like tin cans. They were not like elaborate wood stoves. They were these funky tin can kind of things that had a lid, you know, it's all bent up and everything. And I got a job working in the woodshed. So part of my job was I would have to get 4 barrels of wood chopped small for the deity kitchen, 7 logs for Kirtananda Maharaj's cabin, leave them at the bottom of the steps, 14 logs to go up the hill to Householder Heights, and I don't remember what else, something for the bathhouse. And then, of course, I would get my choice of the best wood, because I was the wood guy. So I was going to be I'm sleeping on the floor, I might as well be warm. So I take some good wood for ourselves. So at night, when the workday would end, the brahmachari that worked in the Incense Warehouse would leave. I would go in there, stoke the fire, run to the bathhouse, bathe, and then go to Sundararati before going back and sleeping on the floor. So this one night, I've been in Vrindaban about 2 weeks. I see the devotee leave. I grab the best wood in Vrindaban, I carry it over to the place for me, bring it up into the Incense Warehouse, and I stoke the fire in the tin can stove. And then I proceed to go to the bathhouse, which is it's moved, it's no longer under the temple, it's in another small green block building over near the barn. Not the barn that's in Bahulaban now, but another barn, also to be found in that book. So I go into the bathhouse. Now the bathhouse is when you open the door, you're standing in mud. And there's a couple of pallets in front of you, a barrel wood heater, and shelves on the wall. And of course you have to put on your dhoti and everything in this, you know, in a mud puddle. You know, you got an 8-foot length of white cloth, you know, you're standing in the mud, you know. You had to do all these kind of tricks. Keep it on the shelf, hold it with your legs, a little part of your arm to put on this dhoti. So just learning how to put it on was a challenge, but what to speak of in a mud puddle. So here I am, I'm running, I light the fire, I run to the bathhouse, I go charging in, and as I open the door, there's only one devotee in there, and I've never seen him before. And he weighs, I won't mention any names, his initials were Uttamoja. And Uttamoja at the time weighs about 450 pounds. And he's standing there, I've never seen him before. He's just arrived in New Vrindavan. And he's standing on the pallet, you know, this massive man, covered in hair. And he's standing on the pallet. And well, okay. So I get ready, and so now he's in his Brahmin underwear, which is, you know, a piece of cloth is hanging. He's covered in ice cold water. I jump on the pallet. I scoop the pallet out, and there was a ritual, the way you bathe, but I won't bother with that now. But I scoop that first scoop of ice water, and I take the ice water, and I pour it on my head. Wow! And of course, down your back, and your head actually feels like it's going to crack. Ice water in January in New Vrindaban. So your head feels like it's going to crack. I'm standing next to a bear. Could be Bigfoot devotee. I'm not sure. And I think Uttamoja has passed away, so I can make fun of him because he's gone. Love the guy. Anyway, the water hits my head. My head cracks in half. I got goosebumps all over. I'm standing there with a piece of cloth hanging up between my legs. And wet, by the way. The door flies open. And it's Ambarish. And Ambarish looks in the room, and he looks at Uttama. He didn't look at Uttama. He just opens the door and he says, "Fire!" And I kind of already know, but I go, "Where?" He goes, "Incense Warehouse." Oh, welcome to New Vrindaban. You know, so I panic. I'm like, oh my God, I've just burnt down the only place I can sleep, the only source of income in the community, and I've lit the place on fire. So I panic, you know, and I jump off the pallet, I go to the shelf, I grab my pants, I pull them on, and they're Uttamoja's pants. They're like this big. They're this big. But I don't want to stop and go, oh, I better change. You know, the place is burning down. So I just wrap Uttamoja's pants around, holding it with one arm, and I go running out, no shoes, no shirt, you know, Uttamoja's pants. And I go running out, and the Incense Warehouse is about 50 or 75 feet down this way. And I go running out, and there are men, they have like a fire brigade carrying buckets from the barn, which is right there, to the burning Incense Warehouse, which is 50, 75 feet down there. So I go running down there, you know, gingerly, no panic, pants held up. And I get there, and like, Krsna Maharaj is standing there, he's going, stand back, stand back. But I feel like, oh, I can't stand back. I've just burnt down the entire source of income for the whole community. So I take a bucket of water from somebody, still trying to hold my pants up, and I go over near the door, and I go, and I throw the water in the door. Meanwhile, flames are everywhere. I throw this one bucket of water in the door, and it actually seems to subside. It goes, and I go, oh great, but then it's water and oil. The oil's from the inside. It goes in, and I'm like, oh great, we saved it. And all of a sudden it goes right over me. Uttamoja's pants did not fall down, but my ears blistered, my eyebrows burnt off, my ears had big blisters on them. And what were we talking about? Kindness. So with this, I am a disaster. I'm like a wreck. I've been in New Vrindaban 2 weeks. The place is the most austere place on the planet. To give you an idea, when I say that this was the only source of income in the whole place, to give you an idea of what that meant, when I came to New Vrindaban, there's a picture of it in there, there's actually two pictures. There's one of me when I came, and I weighed 168 pounds when I arrived in New Vrindaban. When I went home after my first son was born, I weighed 118 pounds. So I had lost 1/3 of my body weight. That's how austere New Vrindaban was. And that's the only source of income I've just burnt down. So I'm a wreck, and I changed my pants somehow. I don't remember exactly how.
Uttamoja's still waiting for his.
Uttamoja's still waiting for his. He couldn't get mine, that's for sure. So I then get summoned to Bhaktipad's cabin. And I go up there, and I am weeping. I'm just crying. devastating. I've burnt the whole place down. I mean, there's no source of income. There's not even a car in New Vrindaban. There's an old beat up van. It's not like everybody has cars. It's not New Vrindaban of today. There's nothing. And I've burnt down the only source of income in the entire community. And Kirnanda Maharaj calls me up to his cabin. So I go up to his cabin and I walk in and I'm weeping. And he's in there behind his desk, which is just a little coffee table on the floor. And Gadadhar is in there. And I'm crying. And he says to me, he's, Bhakti, it's all right, it's all right. And I'm crying. I'm like, hey, no, it's not all right. I just burnt the whole place down. He's like, it's all right, don't worry, it's okay. And I'm crying. And then he says, I say to him, no, it's not okay. I said, the whole community is dependent on the Incense Warehouse. And he said, Bhakti, he said, we're not dependent on the Incense Warehouse. We're dependent on Shri Shri Radha Vrindavan Chami. And he said it with such kindness that I was not, after he said that, there wasn't one bit of me that thought that he was just saying that to make me feel better. I actually, all my feelings of doubt and pain and like failure and everything, that I had done this, just went away. He just was so kind and so sincere about it that I was just relieved. And he said, okay, what you can do, you and your wife can go with Gadadhar, and he has an apartment up at the top of the hill, which we used to refer to as Householder Heights. There were 2 houses up at the top of the hill. You had to go up a winding staircase to get all the way up there. And he said he has an apartment, and he has a loft in his apartment, and you and your wife can stay in the loft. So I, still feeling terrible, but okay, we got a place, and Gadadhar's super kind, and takes us up there, and we go into Gadadhar's apartment, and he has a loft. And what his loft is a shelf about as wide as that table on the wall. The whole apartment is only about 8 feet wide. There's 2 of them in the one little building. They're only about 8 feet wide and about 12 feet long. And it's only one room. And there's a shelf on the wall. And that's where Megamala and I proceeded to spend the next few nights. So kindness, that was an unbelievable display.
Thank you for that. I didn't know how the incense factory burnt down.
There you go.
I knew it did burn down.
There you go. It burnt down, and I am the culprit. I burnt it down.
Confession session or something? Or
What's that?
Is there anything more to confess yet?
Oh, tons of confessions. Everybody knows. You can ask anybody who knows me. They don't have to ask me personally. So yes, no, everyone knew I burnt it down. And actually the next morning I can still recall being near the Incense Warehouse and seeing the brahmachari who worked in the Incense Warehouse, because the brahmacharis lived up at Vrindaban. When I first came for the festival a couple of weeks earlier, the brahmachari, Vrindaban was a ladies' ashram. And when I went home to get my stuff and came back 2 weeks later, they had switched, and the brahmacharis were living up there. So,
what's the time frame? Like,
this is the end of 1973.
I mean, like how long from the time you went there and came back? It's about 2 weeks?
To New York, yeah, like 2 weeks. Went back to New York for like 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks they were all like switched around.
They moved, yeah. The devotees were living in, the men were living in the
Mother Rupa lived in that one too.
What's that?
She was living in Brahmachari ashrams.
Who's that?
Mother Rupa.
Yes, Rupa was up there, Mahara was up
Most
yeah.
of her stories from over that time.
Definitely. So that's my kindness story.
You were saying about the brahmachari who was walking?
Yes, he was walking toward the Incense Warehouse, and he's coming down the road, the upper road there between Bhaktipad's cabin and the temple, the greenhouse. There was that little road that went out there to where the warehouses are. They weren't warehouses at the time. But the brahmachari is walking down the road, and he's coming. And he does this. I'm like, oh, I don't think I want to bump into him. I went the other way. I'll let the Swami tell him. So yes, that was my burning down the Incense Warehouse. So I said that, you know, we were starving, and the menu back in the day was you would have dal for breakfast, oatmeal. And it was just like this gloppy, goopy. In fact, you would hold your bowl. We had bowls that were from the prison. Kirnanda Maharaj had gone to an auction and bought all they were just silver, they weren't silver, but silver colored bowls like this. And, what's that? Yeah, they were thick, heavy little bowls, but they were small, about that high. And you had to paint your number. You didn't do it, but everyone in Vrindaban was assigned a number. You had a number. You didn't live by a name. You lived by a number, because to wash your laundry, or you had to have a number on your bag so that your stuff wouldn't get mixed up. But they would paint your number on your bowl, and the reason for that was that when you came in the morning, I was very astute at chanting japa in the early days, because at Vrindaban we would chant in the either in the temple room or in the prasadam room, and going on in the corner, which was only 20 feet away, in that corner was Mother Jamini, and her job every morning, starting at about 4 o'clock, before Mangalarti, she would start distributing the Mahaprasadam. And you knew which was your bowl by your number. So chanting japa for someone as elevated as myself was all about, I would come into the room, see Jamini down there, locate my bowl, and then start chanting japa. Walk down there, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram. Turn back around, come back, see what else I got. So that was the morning activity in the prasadam room. But they'd serve you oatmeal, and you'd hold your bowl like this, and they'd be trying to get it off the scoop, and you're holding it, and when the oatmeal would hit your bowl, bang! You'd hear it all across the room. Devotees would just knock the bowl right out of their hand. So that was breakfast. It was just oatmeal, no milk, no. They started giving you milk with it, but no sugar on it, no raisins, and it wasn't granola. It was gloopy, horrid oatmeal. No, he was up at the Brahmachari ashram at the time, so, but they would, and then for lunch was dal and chapatis. That was it. There was no rice, there was no sabji. Dal and chapatis was what you got for lunch. So they would come around with the buckets of dal, and they would start by giving you 11 chapatis. That's the only substance. And they were not like, oh, I'm at an Indian restaurant chapatis. They were like these stuff made out of horse grain, dry, no butter, nothing. You get these chapatis in a bowl of dal. So I had come to New Vrindaban in December of 1973. By 1976, I was already cooking. Then there was this devotee who went to India, and he came back. I won't mention his name either, or his initials. But he went to India, and he unknowingly brought hepatitis back to the community. So he came back, he cooked the Sunday feast, we were all happy to see him, and then the following week, everyone in the community got hepatitis, and the place got closed down. They actually quarantined New Vrindaban, blocked off the road on both ends, and nobody could come in or out. Although Sankirtan did come to live here during that quarantine. They let him in if he promised he wouldn't come back out. So, in order to fight the hepatitis, Kirtananda Maharaj got an Ayurvedic doctor, and he told us that the cure for hepatitis was mung water, that you would have mung beans and get mung waters. And I can tell you some horrific stories about people cooking mung, but I don't want to embarrass Tapa Punch. His initials are Tapa Punch. I don't want to embarrass him. But this Indian doctor came and he said, okay, the cure for hepatitis is mung dal water. So it was in 1976. So I've been here, I came December of 73, let's call it January of 74, 2 years before I found out that dal was a bean. We had no dal beans. There was no mung dal here. Dal was watery soup with chopped potatoes and a few chickpeas in it, and that was dal. In the summertime, you'd get curd in it or buttermilk or something, but that was it. No dal, no sabji, no dal beans, and that's how I lost 50 pounds in a year. Anyway, I don't want to bore you all to death. So, what's that?
We had a quality or a word. You had a word?
Yeah, I did. Self-realization.
Self-realization. Well, that one I can't say anything about. Well, I can. I can tell you what I've realized about myself. And
That's all.
yeah, that's it. And that is all. That's not much. And if you don't believe, I can give you my wife's number. She will concur that I have certainly not realized much. As a matter of fact, let me think what she said to me on my way out the door. It was something about nobody can tell her that I told you this. But she said something like, don't over accentuate your own importance. She's absolutely right. If she was here, she'd be in the back going like this to me. Cut it, shut up. Anyway, self-realization. So I can only tell you what I've realized, which was for myself, which was back in the early days, the word in New Vrindavan was you would be freezing, you would be starving, you'd be walking down the road, and here you'd be walking from the horse barn to the temple and covered in mud and it's all frozen. Another devotee would be coming your way, and the devotees actually looked like they were out of the tundras of Russia or something. I mean, and the devotee would be coming your way and you'd be going his way, and as you passed, each of you would look at each other and say, just stay, Prabhu. Just stay. And that was kind of the mantra. So I said, when I first came to Vrindavan, Kirtananda Maharaj said that I think this boy has been captured by the beauty of Shri Radha. So the only realization that I've had over time is that I am not blowing any smoke at all when I say that I have no qualification as a devotee. I don't. And anyone who knows me can concur to that, and especially my wife if you have any doubts whatsoever. But what I have realized is that the greatest gift that I've been given in my life is that I've had the opportunity that for some reason there have been a host of wonderful devotees who think of me as their friend. So that's all I can give you in the way of realization. That somehow or other, if you get the blessings of Krishna's devotees, then even if you're coming from the bottom of the barrel, which Sudhanu suggested I tell some of my bottom of the barrel stories, so you can understand just exactly how far on the bottom of the barrel I'm coming from. Robin?
Prince.
Friends? Prince.
Really?
The horse?
The horse, Prince. Yeah, I was going to... Well, Raghu was asking for a story about Prince, but I'm not allowed to tell it. So Raghu knows the story, Sudhanu and Tapapunj know the story, but I'm not allowed to tell that story in mixed company. Next. It's known in New Vrindavan amongst the older devotees as The horse story. Eddie, tell the horse story. But I can't tell it.
Confessions of the Prashadam addict.
Oh, Confessions of the Prashadam addict. Yeah, so I said the devotees would get dal and 11 chapatis. But anyone who knows the Confessions of the Prashadam addict, if you don't know, you should go back and read it. It's a series of articles. You can find them online in the Brijbasi Spirit that were written by a devotee named Taru, who is a dear friend of ours who lived here. And Taru was the Prashadam addict. So I can tell you just a couple of things real fast. I can remember being a new devotee and, getting my 11 chapatis, and they kind of meant a lot, because you were starving. And I was sitting on the floor one day, and Taru had just gotten married to Mother Mahara, who just moved to Alachua, old school New York and New Vrindaban devotee. And he had just gotten married. The Prashadam addict had just gotten married, was a brahmachari, and now he was married to Mother Mahara. And I'm sitting in the Prashadam room, and they've come by with the beanless dal and the 11 chapatis. And all of a sudden, I see Mahara, Taru's wife, the Prashadam addict, come out from where the deity kitchen is, when it was inside the temple. And she comes out, and she's got her sari kind of pulled over like she's pulling a caper. She's got her sari pulled over. And she's got in her arms a bag, a brown paper bag. And she's got to go from here to, say, not even where Tapa Punj is, that's the exit door. And she's got to go from here to there, and all the devotees are sitting on the floor. And she comes out, scurries, makes a turn. And then all of a sudden, as she's going with the brown paper bag, as if she's pulling a heist, Mother Vishvadika comes around the corner behind her. And Mother Vishvadika is pregnant at the time. And she's coming behind Mahara, and I'm watching this whole thing. And Vishvadika is chanting as such. She's coming behind Mahara. Please, Prabhu, please, it's not fair. It's not fair. And it turns out that although we were getting 11 chapatis, Taru was getting 40 chapatis. So her big brown paper bag was full of 40 chapatis for Taru. And Mother Vishvadika thought perhaps saving her newborn child might be more important than Taru's addiction. One other time I came out of Kirtananda Maharaj's cabin. Sometimes when I have some more time, I'll give you the procedure of what it meant to come out of. If you happen to be serving Kirtananda Maharaj ate like a bird. I mean, you'd get a plate of Mahaprashadam, he'd take just a little, and then you'd get to take it out and distribute it to the devotees. Yeah, right. So there'd be a whole technique of how to, look humble, clean the desk, pick up the tray, turn. His desk was there, the door to his cabin was right there. As you opened the door and went out, you already knew what you were going to eat off his plate. So before anyone, he couldn't see you from this angle, and nobody there could see you yet from the outside down the hill. So you turn, you'd go out the door and you'd go, and then you'd go about 7 feet and swallow that, whatever you'd thrown in your mouth, and then make the turn. You had to go this way, and there was a window there where he could then see you passing. So you take another thing, scarf that in your mouth before you went past the window. And then as you turned to go down the stairs, you'd take one more third piece and eat it off the plate before you got there. I said I wasn't going to tell you that, but anyway. So I'm going down the stairs one day, and I hadn't cleaned his plate. And I'm going down the stairs, and off to the left is the Incense Warehouse that I had burnt down years ago. They'd rebuilt it, and it was now an apartment for Kaladri and Katila, and something else on the other side, I can't remember. And they still got that funky dragging door, but they cover it with a blanket, so that you drag the door, and then you pull a blanket over it. And as I'm going down the stairs, I look over to the side, it's about where those chairs are. And I look over and the door is open and I see the curtain move. And I realize Kaladri and Katila are out of town. So what's going on in their their house. So I go walking over, I reach in, and you had to step down to get into it, into the Incense Warehouse building. So I take the curtain, I go like this, and I poke my head in. And I poke my head in here, and sitting right here is Taru, the Prashadam man. He's sitting like this. I'm right here looking down on him. He has got a tray of 200 ladus on his lap. And he just looks at me. And I look at him, and he does this. He looks up at me. I look up at him. I'm looking down at him, and he goes. I look around, step in the closet, close the door, and him and I sit down and proceed to eat about 40 ladus. There was 200 ladus fit on a tray. That's how I know how many were there. Well, I guess you're all tired of hearing anything from me, so if anybody has any particular questions you might want to ask.
I was wondering about, how Megamala was handling everything.
Megamala was my first wife, and Megamala, when I first met the devotees, we lived in Brooklyn, New York. Megamala did not like the devotees at all. And again, none of you can repeat any of these to her, either I'll get killed by both wives. But I started going to the temple, and I didn't come from a background that was like, I wasn't reading Be Here Now and doing asanas, and that was not where I came from. I had absolutely no inclination toward spiritual life or religion at all, not one drop. So when I all of a sudden got, had an epiphany and got involved spiritually, Megamala was in a state of shock. So I would go to a concert somewhere and then come home at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'd be in the kitchen of her mother's apartment reading through the Bible. And she'd be looking, from the room down there like, what the hell is he doing? So she didn't like, and then when I got into Hare Krishna, then it was like, it's all over, She hated it, and I tried taking her to the temple, I'm sitting there like, when we got to the temple, she started crying. And then when I got her inside the temple, she wouldn't eat anything, tried to get her, I don't want any. But anyway, long story short, it was Katila that saved Megamala. Megamala came and she hated it. In fact, I was going to move here and we were going to split up. I mean, I was only 20 at the time, she was 19. So I was going to move, she said, okay, if you're going to be a Hare Krishna, that's it. And I was going to come here myself, but then she came for that festival and then she wound up coming back with me. But she cried every day, for the first weeks. And Katila was so wonderful to her. Katila, for those of you who never had the pleasure, she was, there are certain, tell all these stories about New Vrindavan, but the real stories of New Vrindavan are the devotees, many of whom you don't see. And you might hear their names, you might hear good or you might hear bad, but I can only tell you that you cannot imagine. You cannot imagine what these devotees did to make New Vrindavan what it is. Some of these names that you hear, there is no New Vrindavan without them. Kirtananda Maharaj, you hear somebody says this, somebody says that. Look around you. Every brick that you see, everything that happened here was influenced by him. And the devotees that helped do it were miraculous. What they did, I'm talking about what I was doing, but that's what all the devotees were doing. And when you look at devotees like Kuladri and Katila, Sudanu, Lajavati, all these wonderful devotees, what they did was that Mother Rupa, all these devotees, what they did, what they lived through, what they sacrificed to build New Vrindavan was just mind-boggling. So Katila, when I came for that festival, Katila was pregnant. When I came back 2 weeks later, she had Prita, and she had Preeta strapped on her. I remember if it was a back or front, but she was already cooking the offerings and, you know, working like crazy. I mean, how hard that they all worked and what they sacrificed. So as far as Megamala was concerned, it was Katila that took care of her and nurtured her, and it's wonderful.
Prabhupada, 1974, you were here,
4.
73, you joined in 73, and next year Prabhupada came.
74, right.
What happened with your meetings? That was the first time you saw Prabhupada? Or you saw
No, I had seen Prabhupada in New York. I had gone to the temple, and you know, I was visiting the temple, and in fact, the devotees, he was visiting there, and the devotees were, you know, pestering me, you know, to join, and they were like, I can remember standing in the doorway at Henry Street, and they were like, come up now and just surrender at Prabhupada's feet, you know, but I couldn't do it. But I will, you know, I did have an experience that for me was like a mystical experience, seeing Prabhupada in New York. Prabhupada was in the temple room, and first of all, you know, I would say that I said that I was, you know, I had no inclination toward, you know, yoga, spirituality, nothing whatsoever. You know, the idea that I would somehow be in a temple some, you know, a year later, unbelievable. But Prabhupada was lecturing, and I came to see him. And even now, I go back and I look at, you know, videos of yada bars at Henry Street, and I see friends of mine that I had taken to the temple. You know, and some of you know some of my friends, you know, who were not really high on a scale of, but here they are in the temple on the floor, you know, bowing before Prabhupada with their hands folded, and Prabhupada was just blessing. But one morning I went to hear Prabhupada lecture, and all the devotees were in the room, and Prabhupada came in and chanted Jaya Radha Madhava, and it was the most unbelievable, you know, it was, I can only describe it like the entire room felt like it was shaking. And it wasn't devotees jumping up and down. Devotees were just sitting there. But it was like the energy became so intense that all the colors became super illuminated. The whole atmosphere was surcharged. And when I came out of the temple after that, all of the devotees were talking about it. All of the devotees were going, oh my God, what was that? It was unbelievable. Later on, I don't know that it's true, but at least the devotees that were talking about it, I heard Kaladri and Sudama talking about that they were there, and it was, they were saying, Kaladri was saying that he thought it was the first time that Prabhupada had chanted Jaya Radha Madhava. He had just started chanting it in the West, but I don't know that that's true. I do know that it's true that sitting there just a couple of feet from him, listening to him chant Jaya Radha Madhava was just like an unbelievably surreal experience. And some other time, when we got more time, I'll tell you about the time Prabhupada called me a Sahajya. And then I can also tell you about the time when Prabhupada referred to me as the death of the Vedic civilization. Don't have time to cover that all now. But if you can just hold the vision of me with Uttamoja's pants wrapped around me at 118 pounds, that should hold you over till you hear those other stories.
Yeah, you mentioned that you were instrumental in burning down of the Incense Warehouse.
Yes, very instrumental.
Unbeknownst to most of us, there was a second effort in Vrindaban at a business that was very entrepreneurial, and you were also instrumental
in wrecking that one?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could.
I'm not sure. There were so many, I'm not sure which one you mean.
Well, it was.
I'm still dealing with the shock of the Incense Warehouse.
During the quarantine, there were about 4 of us who actually didn't catch hepatitis.
Yes, we did. That's right.
So I was assigned.
Yes. I tried to spare you the embarrassment of telling the devotees those stories, but you seem to be a glutton for pain. But go ahead.
So I was asked to cook. It wasn't just mung dal. It was also white rice, unsalted white rice. So each day in the pits, which was a huge challenge to get fire going, I would cook that, and then that would be distributed to everybody else. Probably 90% of the community was suffering from hepatitis. So I came up with an idea how to speed that whole process up, which could have turned into a major, business. Go ahead, you can take it from there.
Yeah. So Talpapunj was involved in the pits at that time, and he came up with the idea because we had, as I mentioned, we didn't even know what dal was. And when we first got dal beans, it took so long to cook them. We were like, oh, these things take forever. That's why we've only been eating potatoes. We'll be cooking these things forever. So Talpapunj came up with the idea. And this is horrific when you consider all the other horrible things that we were eating and went through in this progression of terrible. You've all heard of oat water and rice, and you'll hear a lot of devotees go, oh my God, and you'll hear the description of it, and you'll go, oh, I can't believe they were eating it. It was the best thing ever. If you had been here for the previous presentations for the 3 years before oat water and rice, you were like, oh my God, this is great. We were literally eating for breakfast horse corn. So, I mean, yeah, so Talpapunj came up with the idea that to speed up the process, he would make it like Lipton instant soup. And he took the mung dals and he ground them into a mung flour. And he thought, well, if I put this mung flour into boiling water, then it'll cook fast and we can have the dal much faster. But unfortunately, like one of our breakfast offerings before that, it wouldn't cook. So they would serve you a bowl and you'd have, 3 inches of water on the top and 2.5 inches of powder on the bottom. They were just pulling up this horrific. That was Talpapunj's quest in the city.
It could have worked.
It could have worked, yeah. Another life.
Yeah, nowadays they use split mung, but
Yeah.
those were like...
We were using whole mung. We didn't know, right? We didn't even know what dal was. So to know the difference between split or whole, we wouldn't have known. So Sunama mentioned that I should tell you something about, my early experiences with the devotees. So I'll just be quick. When I first saw the devotees, I was 14. I saw the devotees in Washington Square Park in Manhattan. And when I saw them, I mean, my memory, I can't even remember if they even had a mridanga. I seem to think of them all in white with mismatched socks. And when I came upon them, they were walking in a circle and chanting and blowing conch shells and playing tambourines. And I literally thought, seeing them all in these polyester, I thought, look, these people have escaped from a mental institution. And I wasn't thinking of it in a bad way. I was just thinking, oh, that's really what this is. This couldn't be anything else. People walking in a circle, blowing conch shells, playing tambourines, singing, a bad nursery rhyme. That's what it seemed like to me. Like, what the hell is this? And of course, they then invited me to come to 26th Avenue to take prashad. And I was like, oh, whatever you guys are eating, I'm going to pass on that. I'm going to stick to the pizza and hamburgers. No, thank you. So that's when I was 14. When I was between 16 and 17, by that time I was, had a drug addiction and was hanging with a really bad crowd in New York. And I could possibly be the only devotee that I know that credits becoming a devotee to actually physically threatening a devotee. So what happened was, it was New Year's Eve, and me and 3 of my friends, my best friends, Jimmy, John, Timmy, we were going to watch the ball come down in Times Square for New Year's Eve. And on the way there, we'd taken pills and, had bottles of Jack Daniels in our pockets and the long hair, scruffy. We got in a brawl on the subway, and had to get off early and run from the police to even get over there. And as we were coming up 42nd Street, I see a devotee. And my friends had never seen a devotee before, but I had seen him a couple of years before in Washington Square Park. So I saw this devotee, and there's a famous book by Rudyard Kipling called Gangadeen. It's about, you can watch it sometime or read it, it's about, the British are occupying England and they have a manservant and his name is Gangadeen, and what winds up happening with him is that, I won't ruin the story for you, but I see this devotee out there by himself, Times Square, almost midnight, and I think, oh, I'm going to have a little fun with this guy. So I turn to my friends and I go, yo, fellas, check it out, Gangadeen. And they all laugh because they happen to know. You guys are all dated, you don't know this, who Gangadeen is, but they laugh, and we walk over, and there's 4 of us, and we proceed to get around the devotee. I mean, right around the devotee. He's standing here, John's here, Jimmy's here, Timmy's behind him, and I'm right in his face. And when I say I'm in his face, I mean I'm in his face. So I come up to him, and I go, yo. He just looks at me. He has a Prabhupada hat on, and he has a coat on. It's winter, and it's Dhoti's hanging out from under it. He's got a book bag. And I said, yo. I said, you're bald, aren't you? And he just looks at me. My friends are around. It's like a hot dog wrapped up in a bun, you know. And I go, yo, man. I go, you're bald, right? He doesn't say anything. I said, take off your hat. And he just looks at me. I said, yo, man, take off your hat. He just looks at me. And I go, I'll tell you what. You take off your hat, and I'll give you $1. And he just looks at me. I go, take off your hat. He just looks. And I go, all right, I'll tell you what. You take off your hat, and I'll make every one of these guys give you $1. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to do it. I'm going to give him $1, and I'm going to make all of them give him $1. He takes off his hat. Because I'm not really, from the get-go, I'm not thinking that I'm threatening him. I'm just playing with him. But he don't know that. So he just looks at me. I go, take off your hat. He doesn't do anything, and I lean in and I go, you're cool, man. I pat him on the shoulder, and we all walk off. So how is it that one credits becoming a devotee to a story like that? So my justification or my conclusion has always been that in that moment I offered something to Krishna. And I meant I'm going to give it to Krishna. And I'm going to make all of them give something to Krishna. And Krishna knew it. And even though the devotee didn't take off his hat, and even though I didn't give him the $1, I thought to myself, I'm going to give this guy, I'm going to make them all give him $1. And to this day, that's the only thing I can credit that could possibly have saved me from where I was. That Krishna saved me. That's it. And nobody tell anything to my wife about anything I say.
Did you get a place to live in the end?
Well, this is where the note about no passing stool or urine anywhere outside of the outhouse. I mean, think about this. You're hearing this, but think about it. There's 100 and somewhat people living in Vrindaban, and we have one outhouse. There's no running water. There's no flushing toilets. There's an old outhouse. I think it's on the hill across from Vrindaban. Somebody threw it over there. It's just this wooden thing that literally, when you were in there doing your business, you would look out the cracks and see people walking by. I mean, it was not, and when you had to go, it would, yeah, anyway, I won't get into all that. But what was the question again?
You live somewhere.
Oh, yeah, so now we're sleeping on the shelf in Gadadhar's apartment, and an apartment becomes available. And we're like, oh, this is great. Now there's the bigger apartment building. There's the smaller one, which at that time Gadadhar and Sarveswari are living in half, and Vishwadika and Vana are living in the other half. And now an apartment has come vacant in the other apartment building, which is right next door, like 15 feet away. And you go in, and we have our first apartment. And when I tell you, I'm not exaggerating, our apartment was from here to that tripod. And from that tripod, I don't think it even went as far as the Mridanga. That was the entire apartment. That was where we lived.
And they were like cabins?
No, it was a building that had about 10 of those little rooms in it. And that's where devotees lived. That was the apartments. We lived in those buildings. And how that relates to the stool and urine missive was that we were starving. You would eat oatmeal in the morning. You would eat watery dal for lunch. And then for evening, we would have hot skim milk with nothing, just hot skim milk. No sugar in it, no. But you drank a lot of it because you were starving. And then the apartments were all the way up the top of this hill with a winding staircase going all the way up, and everything is covered in ice. So somebody asked if I had another confession. Yeah. So in the middle of the night, you're living in your new apartment, but you've been drinking 1.5 gallons of skim milk before you went to bed, and now you're waking up in the middle of the night, and you're like, I gotta pee. What am I gonna do? And you're thinking, I gotta go all the way down. I mean, literally, if anyone caught passing stool or urine anywhere other than the outhouse would be asked to leave the community. So the first few nights, I slip in all the way down the hill to the outhouse to pass, and then all the way back up. But I confess, on about the 3rd or 4th night, I decided to pee behind a tree. There, I've confessed. I peed behind a tree. What can I do?
The statute of limitations for that crime expired.
So that was the apartment situation. And the next apartments we had was when they built that barn, the green building down there now. That was the first thing that was really, when we built that was late in 74, I think we built that. It was like, what an accomplishment. I mean, to think that, watching that building go up, Sudhanu worked on it, Soma worked on it. It was like a miracle. Like, we're building a real building? It was like that. And it was initially meant to be the new Incense Warehouse. They needed a new one. That's what they were building there. But halfway through, they decided, oh, it's going to be a cow barn. And then halfway through that, they decided we're going to put a 2nd floor on it, and that's where the devotees are going to live. So when they built the framework for the 1st floor, and they went up to the 2nd floor, they built 4 rooms out of cardboard. You know, Solitex, that black stuff that you just go like that? They built 4 rooms out of that, and put tin over the top, and then took devotee couples and put them in those rooms. Megamala and I got 1 room, Sudhanu and Lajavati got a room, Taru and Mahar got a room, and Romaharsha and Rajeshwari. We all got rooms. But that meant that when you came out in the morning to bathe, Sudhanu, I used to have to wake him up every morning. It was very hard to get up. He was in a lot of Maya, so I'd have to wake him up. Yeah. So, after Sudhanu would wake me up, we would have to walk out. We'd come out of these cardboard rooms, And to bathe, we'd have to bring a bucket of water with us at night from the only source of water over at the temple. And then when we get up in the morning, we'd have to, you know, crawl out of our rooms and go walk across boards, you know, that were across the beams to go out behind a stack of plywood, and that was where we would bathe, and then walk over to the temple at 2:30 in the morning. So I bored you all long enough. Go have some pie. Hare Krishna. The death of the Vedic civilization. Right from Prabhupada's own mouth.
We need to make another night like this.
Another night like this.